Good evening, friends, and welcome back to Tim Kirby Russia. Today we have Zach Payne with us, RedPill78, a man who we were just talking about before this. We just got started here. A man who produces an amazing amount of really high-quality content. His Telegram channel, to be honest, Zach, kind of kicks mine in the butt, but that's okay. We're all on the same side here. We're on the side of goodness and truth and all that stuff. But Zach, I just wanted to ask you one thing, because last time I was on a program that used the term red pill, people kind of asked me, they're like, what do you mean, what pill? Like, are you going to be taking ecstasy? So what is this whole red pill thing? Because from what I understand, it involves, it's from the Matrix, where we have the choice to take the blue pill and stay living in our fantasies, or we take the red pill and we wake up to something else. So what do you want us to wake up to? What is the hidden reality beyond the Matrix there that you're trying to show us on your Telegram channel and other social media platforms?
Yeah, so primarily my content revolves around videos, okay? So I produce streams. I have a number of programs that I do on other networks, on Badlands Media, also on American Media Periscope, now known as AMP News. And it's really all about just discovering the hidden truth that's beneath the layer. I mean, the reason that red pill metaphor has caught on so well is because we essentially exist within a world that's been manufactured. You know, I mean, we see what they want us to see. We learn what they want us to learn. We only find out information oftentimes through mainstream sources. That's the approved narrative. You know, whether it's, election fraud in 2020 or the idea that Vladimir Putin is an authoritarian crazy man. Meanwhile, they're touting Joe Biden as the greatest thing since sliced bread. But come on, don't piss on my head and tell me that it's raining. It's pretty obvious that there's a control narrative that's going on. So obviously the Matrix, when I saw it, so many years ago, I honestly don't remember. I feel like it was maybe 1999.
Unfortunately, it was a while ago. We're getting old. I think that was a mid-2000s thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that I was out of high school. That's really all I can tell you. But so when I saw that, I thought at the time, this is brilliant. I mean, like whether it's happening exactly the way that they say it is, or it's more, just a metaphor for the informational matrix that we live in, it's true. I mean, this is exactly what's happening. I've been interested in, I would say, subjects that are taboo. You're not supposed to have an interest in, or subjects that perhaps discuss a narrative that's different from what the approved narrative is. As an example, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Okay. I learned about the assassination of JFK when I was very young, like between 8 and 10, something like that. My mom and I were reading a book together, called On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison. Oh. And Jim Garrison, he was immortalized in the film JFK. So if you've ever seen that, then you know a little bit about Jim Garrison. But in that book, it's quite clear that there was a wide overarching conspiracy that involved elements of the federal government of the United States, and more specifically, the Central Intelligence Agency, probably in combination with other foreign intelligence agencies, maybe Mossad, also international, transnational criminal organizations like the American Mafia, all of them working together in concert to assassinate an amazing president. Somebody who was bringing peace to America, somebody who was bringing prosperity to America.
Well, here, let's actually break that down, because one thing I just wanted to jump in with is, during the process after the Maidan Revolution happened, and as things were getting worse and worse between America and Russia, Putin said publicly the CIA did it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think that I think that was some kind of play to see, are they going to react to that? How is me sort of releasing this cat out of the bag going to go over? And no one cared, because, in the Western media, they're not going to cover what he has to say. So it sort of remained a sort of internal truth revealing. But again, could you maybe then explain, especially to me, because I actually don't know that much about the JFK period, why was JFK so awesome? He was this different alternative. He had to be eliminated by some means in order for the military-industrial complex to rise. Because, didn't he start the Vietnam War?
I wouldn't say that he necessarily started the Vietnam War. There were military actions that were taking place, when he came in. And then during his tenure, I mean, he was there for a very short time. I would say that the true escalation of the war took place under Johnson. Now, the United States and other nations are oftentimes operating in theaters of war in far-flung places, protecting their own interests, and perhaps even doing things that would approach war, especially to the citizens that live in that area. But it wasn't what it was by the time that it finally ended. I think that remarkably, one of the reasons that JFK was so amazing is that despite the influence of the Central Intelligence Agency and global pressures, I mean, he was able to successfully avert war in the Bay of Pigs. That's clear that because it was always about communism, right? I mean, like everything that we were doing at that time was about stopping the spread of communism. So whether that was in, Asia, whether that was in South and Central America, right in our backyard down there in Cuba, everything was built around that. The Cold War was something that was, ever present in people's minds. And JFK did not want the escalation of that Cold War. In fact, he was reaching out to the Russians. I mean, they were having bilateral talks. He did not want the United States to go to war. He saw a different world. He also spoke openly against secret societies and societies that made up. Yeah, that made up the intelligence community. And he said he was going to smash the CIA into 1,000,000 pieces. So, right there, that's one of the coolest things that I could possibly imagine. It reminds me of President Trump when he came into office and he went to Langley to speak to the CIA. And he said, I'm going to build you a new house without columns. And the idea is that the CIA and their allies within the federal government, that's the fifth column. That is the...
that's what he meant.
That's what he meant. Yeah. Now, he didn't explicitly say that, but this is just me and my research. I mean, I don't think I'm wrong, but, I think that that's exactly what was going on. I mean, he was telling them that he was essentially going to continue the work of JFK. JFK was also going to end the Federal Reserve. He was going to put us back onto a standard of true monetary value with gold and silver certificates. The list goes on, frankly, and he didn't have all that much time to fully flesh out his goals. But, another thing is, he was going after organized crime. It's kind of funny, but I mean, it's arguable that, organized crime helped him get into office in some serious Democrat strongholds where they had a big hold, like in Chicago and perhaps other big cities, Boston, New York, maybe. And as soon as he came into office, makes his brother attorney general, and they go after the mob families. So, he was not making friends all over the place. And that's certainly something that is very dangerous. And again, I make the comparison to President Trump. That's one of the reasons I loved him, is because, he talked about going after the transnational organized crime. He talked about going after the human trafficking, the child trafficking networks, so much of which is wrapped up with the State Department and the CIA. It's wrapped up with Mossad. I mean, this is a tactic that intelligence agencies will use to control people. Who's easier to control than a pedophile? You get a throwaway, an orphan, and you give them to this terrible person, somebody who doesn't have a family. Nobody's ever going to ask about them ever again. Maybe they came from another country. You give that child to that pedophile. That pedophile works in high level in a foreign government, or he's in the military or something, or in industrial espionage. But they do it. That's a tactic that they use, and that's disgusting to me. And I mean, it's no wonder, as far as I'm concerned, that an elements of that government were the same ones that killed JFK. And so, this that probably a long-winded answer.
No, actually, that's why we're in podcast format. This isn't the evening news here. We don't need a 25-second sound bite, and I'm going to yell at the editor. You got to cut that down. No. And in fact, you just said that you loved Trump in the past tense. So again, Trump is a little thing where a lot of Russians ask me about Trump, and although I follow politics, Trump is actually such a big figure and big phenomenon that you can read one thing that paints him this way, you can read another thing. And I'm not talking about the mainstream media, as you just mentioned it. That's a clown show. I mean, for people who are actually like serious political analysts, alternative media, I'll put it this way, the alternative media definitely does not have a verdict out on Trump. He is a little bit of a man of mystery. So why did you love him at one point, and then I guess you don't anymore?
Well, let me be very clear. When I was saying that in the past tense, I was referring to his first term in office. Mm-hmm. So I loved him while he was in office, as he was, making all these decisions and really butting heads with the most powerful, evil elements of the global system. I still love President Trump today. He is still the candidate that I'm voting for. But what he's doing now is very different to what he did while he was in office. Now, once he had the election stolen from him, he walked away from the government. They tried to claim that he had this, this plan for insurrection, like he was going to take over the government. Well, worst insurrection that I've ever seen, because he just walked away and he let a dementia patient take over the nation, along with those same people who tried to thwart him at every move.
So you mean he probably could have actually done something?
He totally could have. He absolutely could have. There were avenues that could have been taken.
Because was this one thing? Oh, sorry, I don't mean to derail you. I want to hear your opinions, but some of these nuances are important. So was this a matter of just cowardice, of like, if I do this, there's a good chance I'll get shot, and so I'm not going to do it? Was it a cowardice factor, or a blind to the possibilities factor?
No, I don't think it was either. I think that first and foremost, Donald Trump loves America, and he loves the American people. If you think about what he gave up to become president, okay, he was loved by all Americans. He was a celebrity. He had a show on NBC. He had a successful franchise. The Trump name was on everything: cologne, steaks, hotels, colleges, you name it. Everybody loved Trump. Then he decides that he's going to run for president, and suddenly the mainstream media decides that he's a racist, he's a misogynist, he's a madman. He cannot possibly win the presidency, even if he wanted to. So there was the narrative that Trump was a bad person at that point, but it did not exist before then. I'm sorry. What was your question again? I forgot where I was going with it.
About why was Trump? Why didn't he take any action during this whole crisis that sort of led to Biden? Because it's true. It's just sad, man. Because of all the sort of stooges they could have put in there, I think they picked one of the worst ones. But anyways, why did Trump just sort of allow this to happen? Because you say that he had the power to do something, so he essentially chose to allow this to happen. What was the logic behind that?
I think the logic behind that was the preservation of America. And I know that might sound, like ridiculous considering what's happened to America since Joe Biden came into office, but because of that immense hatred by the establishment of Donald Trump, because of all of the resistance, if you will, that he had within the federal government, because, President Trump was president and he had people that he had appointed and people that he had hired. But how many of those people really had his back? How many more of them were sleeper cells? They were people who were only there to keep an eye on him, to thwart him, to essentially.
Why did he select them, or did he not really select them?
Well, I think that there was definitely he did not select some of them. He was handed some of them. So going back to the idea of President Trump as a businessman, he wasn't a politician. That was why I thought he would make a great politician, because he hadn't been corrupted by the Washington, D.C. establishment. So he's coming in there without the relationships, without the specific knowledge of who the players are. And so what's he supposed to do? He's going to just put people in the government from the Trump organization. I don't think that would have flied, so he came into Washington, D.C. I know the RNC handed him a list of appointments because they made a deal. They said, if we're going to support you, if we're not going to push somebody else, then, you need to do something for us. This quid pro quo thing, it's just, rigor de rigueur, but in Washington, D.C. And so some of those people were chosen because of that. And then I think other people were chosen to expose them as part of the Washington, D.C. establishment. There are some people, President Trump did it the way they wanted him to, okay? He made his own decisions. He was his own man, 100%. But he showed America what the Washington, D.C. establishment was truly about. That was about them. It wasn't about making America great again. He was the only one in D.C. couple of isolated individuals, but basically, he stood alone. So, and what that shows is that it wasn't just the Democrats. The Democrats are not what's ruining the American people and the nation. It's not just the Republicans that are ruining America. It's both of them working together, the DC Uniparty, who will do anything to maintain power, to siphon off money, to essentially break the American people, and put our grandchildren and our great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren into debt until we're never going to own anything. At that point, they're hoping that we're going to be eating bugs and stuff. But so President Trump did not, enact the Insurrection Act. He could have done something like that. He controlled the military. He could have demanded the seizure of electronic voting machines all across the nation in, say, just the 6 swing states where there was pretty obviously fraud. He could have demanded that there would be some sort of an investigation. But at the end of the day, he walked away and he said, all right, this is what you guys want. You want to get me out of town? You think I did such a bad job? Let's see what happens. So Joe Biden is probably the worst choice that they could have made, but he's also probably the best choice that they could have made, because as a result of Joe Biden getting faked into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, it showed the American people, and the majority of which now believe that massive election fraud is real. It's a big problem, and it decides candidates. It also showed the American people that Joe Biden's not the one who's at the wheel. There's somebody else driving. He's essentially being led down the path, and he has to be, because he's a dementia patient. Okay, nobody in their right mind would have said Joe Biden. Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, I think he'd make a great candidate. No, it was a psyop on the American people, and all of the people that loved Trump. They saw it. We were, obviously this can't be real, right? They cannot be considering putting this guy in charge of the American machine. But they did it. And for the Democrats who, swallowed their pride and voted for him, they said to themselves, well, he can't be any worse than Trump. Well,
and were they wrong?
But yeah, they were totally wrong, because he has been so spectacular bad. Think about this. Think about the prosperity, just the situation that we had here in America under President Trump, how good it was, despite everything they were doing to thwart him at every step of the way. Okay. And then even once they implemented the COVID pandemic, he was still able to keep America rolling along. And yeah, things got tougher, but that wasn't his fault. That was the fault of Dr. Fauci and the Wuhan Institute of Virology and Ralph Barrick and EcoHealth Alliance.
Well, I could say from the standpoint of a lot of people who I would call the black pill community, they would say, well, he tolerated Fauci, so that means he's secretly in on it. They're all part of the same conspiracy. It's all a big dog and pony show for the masses, even including Trump.
So think about this. President Trump didn't actually have the power to just fire Anthony Fauci. No, he didn't. They tried to say that he didn't have the power to fire the FBI director when he fired them. He did, okay, because that was under his executive branch. But so think about this. Anthony Fauci has done some heinous things in his life. Okay. He was like the driving force behind the HIV epidemic here in America, the dispensation of AZT, which was poisonous, almost in exactly the same way that remdesivir was. He was responsible for many of those deaths that occurred during the 80s when people were taking AZT. Turns out people weren't dying of AIDS. They were dying from the toxic effects of taking AZT. We don't have an AIDS epidemic now. Because people are taking effective medicine, which keep them alive and keep their immune system fine. You can get HIV now and then never test negative for it ever again, as long as you're on the right medication. Yeah, but besides the deaths from that, there were also tons of people who were able to, or who unfortunately had to receive tainted blood from the blood supply that was owned by Bayer, hemophiliacs and people in hospitals and stuff. They ended up receiving this tainted blood, and they got HIV. And then, it was basically a big experiment. Well, let's try AZT out on them. We'll tell them that's what they need. And then, unfortunately, it didn't work that way. While he was during that time, he was also like experimenting on young black orphans in New York City. He also experimented on puppies. Like, not, there are animal experiments that happen. But the stuff that Anthony Fauci was doing, it was some Mengele type stuff.
And I bet some of our audience might be saying, you're making a lot of sort of like declarative statements here.
Go look it up.
Hold on. He did this, he did that, he did the other. How do you know all this is the question.
Because I've researched it deeply over the course of, like I said, when I started looking into JFK, I was 8 to 10 years old. That led to a cascade of deep dive research from that point until now. I'm 45. Nobody knew about Anthony Fauci until he walked out on stage with Donald Trump. Suddenly, he's on the radar. Suddenly, people start looking into his history. Okay, Anthony Fauci has a history of academic papers that he's been involved in, federally funded studies such as the experiments on black orphans in New York City. I'm giving people just enough information so that they too can go find the information. I know it's easy to just rattle stuff off, but I'm not going to do that because I'll get fact checked, and then somebody will, come to me and say you're lying, and the only thing I have is my reputation. I'm an independent journalist.
Well, yeah, the alternative media, we actually have to rely on our reputation, unlike certain major organizations with big financing.
Absolutely. Yeah, zero financing right here. The audience, that's it.
Oh, gosh, I wish I could get some. But anyways, one thing I wanted to mention, though, till we bring up Trump is, at the time, within Moscow, when Trump got elected, there were actually lots of dinner parties because sort of the more patriotic elite in Moscow are sure that finally we got the guy in Washington, not in some sort of conspiratorial sense, in the sense that finally in Washington there's someone who's willing to talk to us here in Russia. And I'm serious. There were dinner parties, there were celebrations, because everyone thought that Trump would come in and that would avoid something like the war in Ukraine that happened later. But so one thing is, maybe you could help us then explain. You kind of touched on this already, so if we're beating a dead horse, you don't have to answer. But why then, when Trump, despite the fact that was very unpopular, especially in Washington, he said, "I will work with Russia. We'll find some kind of compromise agreements." He never said he'd be best buddies or we'd be allies, but that we'd be able to have some sort of appropriate dialogue. So he comes in and he promises that. Why did then this whole war machine just keep going? Because people would say that on the one hand, Trump may have delayed the war, but on the other hand, the Kiev forces still got armed and were able to build all their fortifications and prepare for conflict while he was in power. So what did Trump actually do?
So Trump, okay, well, first of all, Trump's a businessman, and he understands that, when you have positive, successful relationships, everybody prospers. And again, President Trump loves America in the same way that Vladimir Putin loves Russia and the Russian people. So Putin is going to make decisions that are best for Russia. Donald Trump is going to make decisions that are best for America. And wherever we can meet along the way that allows both of our nations to prosper, then that's a win-win situation. President Trump is like the only president who didn't actively start a war when he came into office. Take a look. Yeah, the closest he came was when he bombed an airstrip in Syria. Turns out that it was not just some airstrip; it was a covert Iranian nuclear testing facility. They were enriching uranium there, and nobody died. The mainstream media was calling him weak, saying that he needed to attack Syria, he needed to bomb somebody. And then as soon as he did, this was the first time they gave him any positive coverage. They were like, Donald Trump finally becomes the man that we all want him to be.
Didn't Fareed Zakaria said he finally became my president or something to that effect?
He did. Yeah. So freaking stupid. And so then they find out, oh, wait, nobody died. And oh my God, it was an Iranian facility. Oh my, they've been trying to arm Iran with nukes for the longest time. Why? Because the threat of thermonuclear war allows that military machine, the military industrial complex, to carry on. Now, to your question, Donald Trump might have been president, but he wasn't a dictator. He wasn't an authoritarian. We have a system of checks and balances here in the United States, and even more importantly, compartmentalized segments. Ukraine, the CIA, and the State Department have had ongoing covert operations in Ukraine since the end of World War II. Okay, as soon as World War II ended and the relationship soured between Russia and the United States, we began cultivating the Azov Battalion and the Nazis. I mean, that Nazi movement was left over from the Germans and the Ukrainian Nazis at the end of World War II.
Well, yeah, that's who was financing Bandera during the last years of his life on his sort of terroristic escapades, because he didn't die in World War II. I think he died in 1953 or 56, way after.
Yeah. So we had a network set up there, and it wasn't just the United States with the CIA and the State Department, but NATO aligned nations. I mean, there were constant ongoing operations. So there's money coming in from all over the place, and not all of it is going to be public. State Department spending money, NGOs, that's a huge problem because money can be funneled in through those NGOs. They spend it on humanitarian efforts, and at the same time, they're actually building up these covert armies. They're training special forces. They're teaching people how to go behind enemy lines. Look at what they've been able to do in Russia with the bombing of the Crimean Bridge and and the Nord Stream pipeline. Those weren't just some fly-by-night operations. I mean, they were heavily invested in those operations. And whose money do you think that was? It was the freaking CIA. It was the CIA probably training some local guys who were perfectly willing to go ahead and do whatever. I mean, and not just off the street. We're talking about people who are highly skilled. Yeah. So those things happen because of the nature of our country, because of the system that we have set up. The military industrial complex and the intelligence community, in my opinion, is the most dangerous beast in terms of, for our safety over here and your safety over there, because they want to perpetuate war. They want to perpetuate espionage. And it's not just about, stopping communism or even stopping Russia per se. But there's a lot of illegal activity that happens behind the scenes. There's a ton of grift that is centered and traced back to Washington, D.C. Ukraine specifically was like a playground for the intel communities and the elites. You're talking drugs, weapons, human and child trafficking. I mean, just all kinds of stuff. It was a no man's land, essentially. And so they need to keep that place open for business, so to speak. And so President Trump comes into office. Do you think they went to him on first day in the Oval Office and said, hey, guess what? We've had a great thing happening in Ukraine for decades now, and we're just really hope that you don't want to screw that up. So just keep letting us do whatever we want. I mean, it's hidden. It's hidden between layers of bureaucracy, and it's in compartmentalized sections. The left hand does not know what the right is doing. And that's how things are able to be kept quiet. It's really unfortunate. And, I would like to see it done away with personally.
And I think that there's also this sort of belief that if Trump were to say to go to the public and say, it could be Ukraine, it could be another issue, and go to the public and say, I'm powerless to do anything about this issue. And that's where his presidency falls off. And you could see that a lot over the years with Putin, actually, because especially when he first came into office and he had very little power, there was a lot of that where he doesn't really like to make big claims about what's going to happen in the near future or big plans, or he kind of steps back in order to kind of not take that flack. And maybe I think Trump had to do kind of the same thing, because as soon as you look weak, that's when your political career is over. So I think they actually share a lot of things, like you were mentioning before. And I think one of the things that also really let's just say, explains what Putin has done. There's a really good book called Putin versus Putin I recommend everyone read, because it kind of shows how, on the one hand, Putin's done some very patriotic stuff, pro-Russian, and then things that people conflate with being globalist. And I think it's more of this sort of eternal, like, three-card Monte game or game of exchanging between sort of like globalist forces, the elite within the country trying to get one thing but giving the other thing, and trying to ultimately come away from this card game ahead. I think that's kind of how Russia works, but anyways.
Right. I think you're right, and I think a lot of the same thing has happened here in America. You know, I mean, like President Trump, like came into office, you know, with the message of American nationalism. You know, I mean, but then once he came into office, he said, you know, I'm a globalist and a nationalist. That's not, I believe, by design or desire on his part, but frankly, we live in a global civilization. We live in a global world. You know, Putin, Trump, anybody running a nation that is sitting at that level in the global hierarchy has got to operate in a globalist system, and you've got to do it in such a way so that, you know, your people prosper, but that you're also allowed to play within that global system. And, you know, I think that hopefully at the end, you know, what each of our countries and all of the nations on earth would do would be to focus their efforts inward. You know, stop looking outward, fix your own damn problems before you go meddling in the affairs of others. You know, stop telling other nations, you know, who they need to be, how they need to act, when we can't even trust our own elections here in the United States. You know, we have homeless people. It's insane, like the levels of homelessness and just open air drug markets in some of the largest cities in the nation, you know, and many of them run by Democrats. And this is unfortunately where that stereotype really plays out in a pretty obvious way. You know, I mean, this goes back to the idea of shining a light on what needs to be seen. You know, I mean, when President Trump came into office, there was a very quick delineation between, you know, red states and blue states, red cities and blue cities. And I'm from Michigan. I lived in Michigan for most of my life. My fiance is from Ohio. So
baby, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so, you know, I grew up in a heavy Democrat stronghold. And over the years, I saw it deteriorate more and more. Michigan has more of the most dangerous cities, like violence per capita, than any other state in the nation right now. Never, ever thought that would have happened, but it's true. And I moved down to Florida, not only because I wanted to live near the ocean, but more than anything, I didn't want to feel that I was being restricted. I wanted to feel that I was able to live my life unencumbered with the rights that have been granted to me by God and that are enumerated in our founding documents. So I felt like Florida was the best place to do that. It's a tremendous difference down here than what it is up there in Michigan. You know, in Florida, the local sheriffs would suggest that if, you know, somebody comes into your house in the middle of the night, rather than making them do all the paperwork, you should probably just shoot them before they kill you. Just get it over with. You know, I mean, that there's something to be said about the Second Amendment for polite society. Okay, the more guns that people have, the less likely other people are to do violence against them. Because if you're stupid enough to do that, you never know when the person that you're trying to victimize might have a handgun or a rifle in their truck or whatever it is. People are polite down here in Florida. People are polite in Texas. People are, pardon my French, but they're dicks in Michigan. You know, I mean, like you have people just acting in disgusting ways, doing terrible things to each other.
It's a global phenomenon, not even just guns, but in general. I mean, in a pre-modern society, because violence could sort of happen at any moment in time, and there wasn't so much of a police force or the ability to really punish people for it. That's, I think, why medieval times, the Renaissance times, late medieval times, people were so gracious with their which I think for modern people it seemed ridiculous just how polite people had to be, but it came for a reason. You want to live in a polite society, you kind of in a way have to live with the threat of violence.
Exactly.
They kind of come hand in hand, because if you're in a, you know, essentially a country that's like a nursery then, or a kindergarten, then you can be as naughty as you want and be a big crybaby and all that. So yeah, and that's one of the nice parts about Russia, where street violence kind of happens a little bit more often, is that if someone gets out of line, they get hit, and
I've heard that.
It's a good thing. So
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, people checking each other, I mean, like that's how it should be. People get out of line if they think that they're special and they can do whatever. We have this thing here, I don't know if you've seen it, but main character syndrome. People acting like they're more important than any of the other people around them. It's like these girls doing TikTok dances on the subway or in the middle of a Costco or something like that. Just inconveniencing everybody around them because they got to get their video made. It's completely mindless. It contributes to the lowering of the average American IQ, the destruction of our attention spans, and just flooding the market with banality, just useless entertainment that people get consumed with because they're not intelligent enough to go look someplace else. That is not a condemnation of everybody, but unfortunately, there is a real problem among the younger generation, people who were raised on TikTok and Instagram Reels and only know social media. I mean, like I am on like the cusp of the first social media generation. I mean, I guess I am. I mean, I had
both of us are. I'm also in my 40s, so both of us. I mean, like when we were already teenagers, even the dial-up internet was a big thing. I mean, everyone was at home on dial-up internet, talking with everyone from school or whatever. So I think we're definitely the first internet generation. Yeah.
For sure. We used to so I had like a CompuServe X86 where I would get online with the baud modem. We would log into a multi-user dungeon and basically do a choose your own adventure type like Dungeons and Dragons thing. Like that was the extent of the internet. You had some message boards and stuff, but even before like AOL Instant Messenger. And then once Al Gore invented the internet, and I say that facetiously, and they started rolling it out en masse, we could go to Michigan State University and we'd sneak into the engineering building in the middle of the night and use their very powerful computers to be able to log on to the World Wide Web and go to any website that we could possibly think of. And, frequently I would go and look at things that I couldn't find anywhere else, because at a certain point, certain things started disappearing from libraries and certain information you couldn't find anything about. And, I mean, like, as an example, the Oklahoma City bombing, I was watching that when it was being reported initially. And so I saw that contemporaneous reporting and I saw how the story changed. And I was like, I saw John Doe 2 completely disappear. And, all these things just got memory hold. So, I mean, you're a 14-year-old kid and you sneak into some building in the middle of MSU's campus in the middle of the night. You start looking for things that you're not going to find anywhere else. It was so much fun. But yeah, I mean, once social media came around, Friendster, MySpace, Facebook, I mean, all of those. And, they've had like varying levels of importance in my life. Now it's in terms of a career, it's something that's unavoidable. I mean, like I work online. And so, a portion of my day must be spent online. But I exist in the real world. And I think that is something that many people have lost. And even, people who consider themselves to be, very attuned to the real nature of the world. I mean, people who are awake, not woke, but, people spend too much time online. You got to get outside. It's funny. There's this meme from my chat going around. It shows me in 2018, and I lived in Michigan. There wasn't much sun. I was inside working like 12 to 16 hours a day. I'm very pale. Then I moved to Florida and I start getting darker and darker and darker. And so it's like me in 2018, white pasty, me in 2022, pretty dark. And then by 2024, I'm supposed to have fully made my transition to a black man. But, I mean, you got to get outside. And that's my whole point. That's my whole point.
Yeah, I would say so. In fact, one of the great saviors of my sanity is playing American football here. So
right on.
I'm probably too old, but gosh, I love it. That really brings you back to reality because it's just you and the defensive line. Well, I play offensive line, so it's just you and the defensive tackler end or middle linebacker or whoever. It's just you against one guy, and it's good stuff. Really wakes you up, brings you back to reality. Because unfortunately, part of the culture of the internet here is I think a lot of younger people subconsciously, like they're not thinking about this in their head, but subconsciously, they kind of think like, okay, I like anime, and I'm going to talk about all this anime stuff online, but then I'm going to dress up like an anime character when I walk out of the house, and it's like, you got to divide these worlds. You can't go around looking like a goofy feminine anime boy and expect to not make yourself a target. But
So do you guys have like seen kids like that in Russia? Because I have to be honest, I've never seen any video coming out of Russia that was anything other than just normal people. Like I have never seen like explorations of specific scenes in Russia.
Downtown Moscow. So if you follow my work at some point, or if some of your viewers subscribe to Tim Kirby Russia hardcore, they would notice that I'm very critical of downtown Moscow because it has the same sort of alignment of factors that create the useless youth of the West. So you have people living in very small apartments, people who are raised by single moms, and people that also who sort of have nothing to do in life. And because downtown Moscow is all asphalt, there's something that's very castrating about that. Like as men, we're supposed to go out and do stuff or try stuff. At the very least, I don't know, paint a fence, cut some, even though I lived in the city, man, my dad liked to have a fire for Christmas and all that stuff. So I actually chopped firewood as an urbanite, right? So, I mean, something physical. But a lot of the, especially the male gender, grows up in downtown Moscow with absolutely zero physical activity. The rest of the country's different. It's more spread out. The people who live in houses obviously have stuff to do with their kids, and there's more sports and all that. So, yeah, there's only sort of one type of Russian person. It's like the downtown Moscow mama's boy. So they exist. Like if you go to the middle of Moscow and you were to film teenagers, you'd probably want to vomit because would you feel like there's no hope. I was recently in, not Saratov, oh my gosh, Orenburg. So or Orenburg, I should say the more proper way in English. But in Orenburg, I was so happy because I got there on a really late flight. So it's like midnight. And this is kind of a smaller city. I don't know, like the size of Pittsburgh or something. And I'm like, man, what can I eat? So anyways, they have like doner kebabs. And when I was there, in line were all the teenage guys. And they all had their crappy cars, but with their girlfriends, all with the cars that they customized and fixed themselves. Everybody's got the cool Adidas on. The only difference is from the older generations of Russian guys. In the 90s, you had a shaved head. Everyone had a shaved head. Now they all have like really nice haircuts. In fact, they basically your haircut. You're doing very well. I'm balding here. You're hanging on much better than I am.
I'm balding too. There's camera magic going on here.
Well, anyways, you look like one of those young guys out there, and it just warmed my heart to see like guys being guys, and the women with them are like, wow, my boyfriend's so cool. He's got this beat up car he fixed himself, and he's gonna take me out to get the friggin' doner kebabs. And it was just a real, nice feeling. And obviously when you play American football, you get also moved into a world where there are no mama's boys, because you're either tough or you get out. It doesn't matter. We have, both of our running backs are pretty short, and I think for the second team, because I'm old, so I mostly block for the second team. I think our running back might be 5'5", but he is tough. He is absolutely jacked. So, you can see that the majority of Russia still is more human as opposed to being post-human. But you can definitely find in downtown Moscow plenty of the bizarre post-human crowd if you look hard enough.
So I watched this channel of a guy in Russia. Yeah. It's called Vasya in the Hay. He's like he was a stuntman, and basically made his money young, retired because his body's all beat up. But he just goes around to like villages like outside of Moscow and stuff, places where people need help, and he'll like buy them groceries, and like if they need something, then he'll help them out and stuff. Sometimes there's people who can't get off of alcohol or something like that, and you put them in rehab and then check in with them later. But yeah, I mean I guess that is like the majority of of my my exposure to Russian culture. And he goes into the city, but even when he does, I've never seen any scene kids. But the people that he speaks to out there, real salt to the earth people. But it's I don't know that people really think about this or recognize this, but I mean, Russia is vast, you know, and large swaths of it is uninhabited. You know, you've got extreme temperatures, you've got very metropolitan areas, cities and stuff. I would love to go to Moscow. I actually, until everything popped off with Russia and Ukraine, I have a friend, Dr. Juliet Engel, who does work. She does humanitarian work in Russia. And so she's friends with people on the, it's like the Russian Congress. I can't remember.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was trying to do like a sort of independent journalist exchange thing, like, you know, have some Russians come to America, have some Americans go to Russia. But, you know, that's all on hold until all of the craziness.
Well, trust me, people in Russia are very desperate to make any sort of communication with anyone in the alternative media, because it's just sort of like, guys, well, the thing is, their perception of things, okay, is that we Westerners really believe all that propaganda. And they think that if they can at least invite us out there to sort of have a conversation, they can maybe snap us out of it. And that's not the case, because a lot of people don't believe in it, or the overwhelming majority aren't even thinking about it. You know, I always tell Russians, they're like, well, what do Americans think about Russia? I'm like, how often, asking a Russian person, how often do you think about Poland? I don't know, virtually never. That's as often as they think about you.
Yep.
You know, and so that's kind of, I think, one of the major hurdles is that Russians don't understand, is they think that everything that happens here is going to be really important to people in the West. And I mean, it's important to our three-letter organization friends in the military-industrial complex, but it's not really important to the masses. So that's kind of where that all comes from. They really want to just keep inviting every possible blogger, journalist, whoever, just a television show host, just anyone they can to hopefully break through that sort of glass barrier between societies, but I don't really think it's working too well.
If any Russian media is watching this, any Russian podcasters, any Russian citizen journalists, I would absolutely love to do that. I mean, I would, that'd be so awesome as far as I'm concerned, because, you know, I mean, I do a couple of different interview shows a week. And so and Tim, I definitely want to have you on the show and talk about your experience and why you went to Russia. But I love talking to people all over the world. I mean, and especially people who care about what's going on, that are not just going to be accepting whatever it is that the mainstream media is going to be regurgitating to you.
Well, I see that we're approaching sort of like the 45-minute mark, and I know you've got a lot of things to do, so I'll try to end this up on one question and one sort of a comment here. So the first comment is, if you do visit Russia, I'd really recommend visiting either one of the big cities. So you have Moscow or St. Petersburg. That's number one. Visiting some other like Russian city of a more smaller size, and then visit like an ethnic republic, because then you sort of get the bigger picture of how Russia actually is. Because like if you go down to like Dagestan, it looks like Iran. It is like Tehran, very well, you know, they would probably get offended by that because they don't really like the Iranians that much. But you see my point. It looks like it's a sort of different universe, but everyone speaks Russian. So, like, there's, you know, because there's like these ancient fortresses that go up into the mountains, and they're not in like a European style. And you have all these like tea houses with this. It's crazy. But anyways, I think that gives people a better view of how things are in Russia on one single vacation. But anyways, about something a little bit more serious, where do you think this is all going? So we have the war, we have the 2024 elections, and it seems like the war in Ukraine, the 2024 elections are kind of like heading towards each other, like the end of the war versus election time. What do you think is going to happen when these two, when they hit a vertex? Was that the proper word? When they collide?
I think apex, vertex, I think you could say that.
Apex was the better word. Yeah. I don't know. I didn't have a math degree. I had a design degree. So anyway.
No problem. So, you know, I think that from my perspective anyways, and I think that this is now the prevailing idea and philosophy in America, you know, there is certainly no excitement or desire for the American people to continue what's been happening in Ukraine. Largely, the poor Ukrainian people, whether it's, the Donbass, the eastern portion or the western portion, it's like they've been pitted against each other. Zelensky has essentially just sent his people to the meat grinder. The Russian people have lost so many people. It's horrible. It's war. It's death. It's not anything that I ever wanted to see happen. And I truly didn't believe that it would, but unfortunately that's the direction that it went. We don't want that happening anymore. And more than anything, we no longer want any of our money to be headed over there to fund any such wars. And thank God we just got a new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, because he has refused to provide any additional funding to Ukraine unless Joe Biden agrees to fund the fixing of our southern border.
Now, thank goodness.
Yes,
thank
yes.
goodness.
And so I hope that no more money goes to Ukraine, and I hope that this is the end, and Zelensky sees his way out the door, maybe ends up hiding in a foreign nation for the rest of his life. Whatever it is, I don't want to see the war continue on. I want it to be over, and I just want the people of these nations to be able to sleep easy at night and know that they're not going to have to worry about getting bombed in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add what you said earlier, that really we need to, in the world we're in now, focus more on developing ourselves, and that's exactly with protecting the southern border. Because even during the Cold War, to be honest, the real threat to America, because back then, how I'm different from a lot of Russians is back then, they tend to be a little bit more apologetic about the Soviet Union, whereas I don't. I kind of understood why the United States did a lot of the things that it did that were kind of harsh during the Cold War, because the mentality of the Soviet Union was very expansionist, let's say. It was more aggressive, more universalist. But as we're going forward, still, or I should say, back then, although the Kremlin could finance a lot of stuff, the real threat would be some sort of internal blossoming of communism, not so much infantrymen on a boat coming from another continent trying to land and fight a beachhead on the territory of the United States with 250 million guys, the population back then, I don't know, 100 million adults with 100 million guns waiting for them. It was never a real serious threat, except in the sort of manipulation, media, the subconscious mind. That's where the threat was, but that again, that's an internal threat.
No, I absolutely agree. And unfortunately, that's what we're facing right now more than anything. It's like the powers that be in Washington are all focused on Russia, the creation of this Cold War 2.0 and the new international boogeyman. But the true enemies are here in America right now. The communists have gained some level of control. I mean, that's what we see in the radical left. That's what we see in this woke ESG type culture. It's all elements of that communist subversion that's been at play since time immemorial. What we see right now with the use of the black culture here in America. People are essentially tools for that ultimate goal, the destruction of the nation by pitting these various elements of our national fabric against each other. When communism was the prevailing philosophy in Russia and the Soviet Union, that was one of the big psychological operations that was happening here. The creation, the fostering of that tension between Black America and white America.
Yeah, that was very evident. During the 60s, that was one of the big strategies was we'll get African America to rise up and all that stuff. And in some ways, it's kind of ironically for people who see the civil rights movement as a good thing and the step in the right direction. That was kind of more thanks to the Soviet Union than anything. They kind of forced the issue. So
they did. They did. I think civil rights is, great. I think that, we should have the concept of all men created equal, but it was only allowed to go so far. It was harnessed by bad actors here in the United States. Yeah. And unfortunately, there were a bunch of real, organic, peaceful movements that were dedicated to things like that, like the anti-war movement or the civil rights movement. They were harnessed by our own intelligence community in concert with communist elements from other parts of the world. And so that was able to take hold here. They basically stayed below the surface. They gradually changed the culture and the overall mindset of America. And then when it was time, they just kicked off with the infection of that woke mind virus. And now we're kind of swinging the pendulum in the other way, if you will. People have had enough. People understand that communism is a real threat here. It's so ironic because, Russia and there is no Soviet Union. It's the Russian Federation. Yeah. Communism is not what's going on over there, but we're really fighting it on a daily basis here. And it's terrible. I mean, they've been very successful, and the American spirit has been demoralized to an insane degree. And and it's something that, as a nation, we've got to have the will to knock ourselves out of, to kind of rise above it. And I think that's what we're doing. So getting back to your question, the funding of the Ukraine war is ending. They are now trying to fund the war in the Middle East. I think that they wanted to kick off World War III with Russia and Ukraine. That was unsuccessful. We wasted hundreds of billions of dollars over there. And now Mike Johnson is asking for audits and for commitment to fix the southern border before any money goes there. But he's also asking for the commitment to fix the southern border before any money goes to the Middle East. They now believe that they can go ahead and kick off World War III in the Middle East. And it's been fascinating to watch the national dialogue about what's happening between the Israelis and Hamas. And, I mean, if you would have told me that the mainstream media would have been supporting the idea of attacking Israel or calling them war criminals and essentially engaging in open anti-Semitism, which is like their buzzword, I never would have believed it. I mean, like the things that have been said and the demonstrations that have been put on, if they had been done by people that were supporters of President Trump, we would have been Nazis. But now, they're the ones who are acting like Nazis. They're the ones who are calling for genocide. I'm kind of just sitting back and enjoying the whole thing. But at the same time, I'm disgusted because, again, it's another war. It's more death. It's more destruction. And, this is a situation that's even more tense than the situation between Russia and Ukraine. There is never going to be peace in the Middle East unless someone with the vision and authority to come in and help implement that peace plan is in power here in the United States. And I believe that to be Donald Trump, because when he was here, we had the Abraham Accords. There was peace between the Palestinians and the Israelites. And I think that can be brought back. But I think that America is going to continue to see this rise in tension. The destruction of the American economy. We are headed for some tough times here, Tim. And I think that by the time 2024, the election cycle reaches, Joe Biden's popularity and in general, the popularity of the federal government and these bureaucrats that we know we can't trust, it's just diminishing day by day by day. And that's just going to continue to get worse. And people are going to be clamoring for Donald Trump to return come November 2024. And, all of us that were always his supporters, I mean, we're just continuing to move forward and, kind of enjoying the ride. But the people who supported Joe Biden or who at least didn't support Donald Trump are now looking at their bank accounts. They're now looking at the state of the nation. They're now looking at the state of the world, and they're saying, what the hell did we get ourselves into? And it's very obvious that is a symptom of business as usual in Washington, D.C. We need an outsider. We need people in Washington who don't want to be politicians, who don't want to get rich as civil servants, because you shouldn't. There's no reason that Joe Biden should be owning multiple beach homes, or Barack Obama should have that incredible estate in Martha's Vineyard. These people that lecture us about climate change and the rising sea levels, they're still buying beachfront property. Why the hell do you think that is? Did they really believe that the ocean levels are going to rise and we're all going to die? No, they just want to take all of your money. They want to charge you for breathing. They want to control every aspect of your life. And this is part of that globalist agenda. And Joe Biden and the current regime in Washington, D.C., they are an authoritarian regime. They do represent the perpetuation of that globalist agenda. And Donald Trump is the antithesis of that. Nationalism, making America great again, that is the antithesis of globalism. And that is becoming more and more attractive to more and more people every single day. We are the majority in America. Things will get better, but until then, it's going to be hairy.
All right. Zach Payne, RedPill78 on Telegram at the very least, guys. If you're watching this, you probably are on my Telegram, which means use Telegram, which means you can find Zach. Thank you very much for your time. That was awesome. Very, very cool. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tim. And you can also find me on Rumble, rumble.com/RedPill78. I have a website, RedPill78news.com. I'm also on Twitter, Truth Social, Gab, and Getter at RedPill78. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure.